Welcome back to Rocinante Podcast. I'm Sean P. McCarthy here, as always, with Angela Nagel, and we're joined today, once again, by regular guest, friend of the show, Malcom Kyeyune. He's the author of a new piece in American Affairs called The Rise and Fall of Nuremberg Christianity. We'll have a link to that in the description. We'll talk about it a bit more later, but I wanted to just start with the reason why we're all here. It's February 25th, 2026, and the U.S. is undertaking the largest military buildup in the Middle East since before the 2003 invasion of Iraq. We're at a pretty major precipice in history because I believe either we're going to war with Iran or a lot more Epstein files will leak out related to Donald Trump. But Malcom, you're the best paradox map gamer between the three of us. What are your general thoughts on the U.S. military buildup and where you think this is likely to go?
I mean, I think it's really interesting in that we're basically at a point where we're pretty close to something like the end of the so-called Tatar joke over Russia. And if you're familiar with how that ended, the Russians were basically conquered by the Mongols, who then split off into successor kingdoms or empires, you could say. And the Russians were then forced to pay tribute to one of them, like the Tatars. And the grand princes that would go on to form a united Russia were basically the tax collectors for the Tatars. And they used that position in their own sort of internal maneuvering against the other principalities of Proto-Russia. But eventually they fought themselves strong enough to basically say, fuck off, we're not going to pay taxes to you anymore. And the Tatars, upon hearing this, they assemble this huge army. And they say, you're either going to pay or we're going to come over and crush you. And the problem is, and this eventually produces what's known as the Great Stand on the Ugra River, where the Tatar army rolls up to fight the Russians, and they're separated by the Great Ugra River. So they're standing there staring at each other. And the Tatars try to cross at like a crossing point, but the Russians start firing arrows at them, and that's not really that nice. So they sort of back off, and then they go, okay, well, we're going to find another point to cross. And they eventually do. They go there, but then the Russians have moved over there. So they're standing there staring at the Tatars. And that's not really that nice either. So they sort of just stand there and stare at each other for weeks. And eventually, nobody really knows what exactly happens, but eventually the Tatars just turn around and leave. And that's basically recognized as the formal end of the Tatar dominion over the Russians. We've basically assembled the same sort of force here that's staring across the Persian Gulf at the Iranians, and the Iranians have moved all their missile batteries towards like the Iraqi border. They've sent out all these NOTAMs that they're doing exercises. They've practiced shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. They've gotten the Chinese to send over these surveillance ships. And they've gotten the Chinese to share satellite imagery of all of the American planes in the region to randoms on Twitter. So if you're a random on Twitter, thanks to, the glory of Xi Jinping, if you had a bunch of missile batteries, you could accurately target them because you know where the American planes are. Mutatis mutandis, that means that the Iranians know where they are, because I'm pretty sure they have a direct line to Beijing. They don't really have to go to Twitter for these images. So both sides are prepared for war. But one side is the Tatars here, and one side is the Russians. And it's the Americans who are the Tatars. It's the Americans who are trying, finagling, they're searching for a way to avoid the arrow fire and to avoid this. They would much rather that the Grand Prince Ivan just understand that the Tatars are so powerful they can never be defeated. Like, remember Genghis Khan, like he was our ancestor, right? That like Ivan just tells the bowmen to lay down their arrows and stop firing at the Tatars and just say, yeah, you people, you are the boss. Like, we're going to keep paying our taxes, because they don't really want to fight, but they can't really afford not fighting either. And so the lead up to this entire thing has basically been the Americans asking for yet another fake strike where they say, we're going to strike this target on Tuesday. So you have a week to evacuate all the equipment and all the personnel, and we're going to level it to the ground. And then you can strike this. We can negotiate for you attacking one of our bases, and you can level it to the ground if after we've evacuated all the expensive equipment and all the people from there. And then we can say, yeah, like, we fought, and both sides can claim victory. But the Iranians this time, they say, no, we're not interested anymore. Like, if you're going to attack us, it's going to be a real war. We're not interested in fake wars anymore. It's either no war or a real war that continues until one of us is dead.
Malcolm, what is the likelihood, or is it impossible for something like a attack that they did on Maduro, where they sent very small, like a special group in to do something? Is that impossible in the Iranian context?
I mean, if it's an interesting question, because the real issue here is what happened in Venezuela. Like, people say this is the American military showing its total domination and so on. Like, no other military could do this. But it's like, do what? I mean, they moved in a bunch of helicopters to capture a guy. But in reality, like, you couldn't do that against any sort of military that wasn't tipped off. Like, this was not a moonless night, first of all. You could see the helicopters, like, there's video clips of them. Like, you could bring down those helicopters with heavy machine guns. So what I would say probably happened with Maduro is that this was just a deal negotiated in advance where Maduro basically, I mean, this was a story in the newspapers where, like, negotiations were pretty advanced, with Maduro being willing to give himself up if the rest of the party stayed in power. And now that Maduro has been, quote unquote, kidnapped, what has happened? Maduro has been moved to the US. The rest of the party is still in power. And they don't look like particularly interested in working together with the gringos. But even if they, like, capture the Ayatollah or whatever, like, what would that do? Like,
well,
what's the political effect of that exactly?
I mean, that fits into a foreign affairs article we were talking about before we started. Nate Swanson, Why Iran Will Escalate. He's a former diplomat for both Biden and Trump. And basically he makes the argument that, well, Iran has realized that the U.S. and Israel seem to be striking them regularly for domestic political reasons, and unless they give Trump a bloody nose, that cycle will just not stop. They don't want, as you were saying earlier, they don't want to keep doing these kind of kayfabe strikes anymore, because, you know, Trump in his State of the Union didn't seem to give any existential reason as to why we need to attack Iran now, except for, I guess, he got something from Mark Levin made up about how Iran is working on a ballistic missile that can take a nuke to the United States. I guess that's the new line they're going with. But the point was, in the foreign affairs piece, was essentially, yeah, you know, Trump has broken these red lines that people warned him about, like moving the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem in 2018. He was warned about violence. It didn't really happen. The original strikes on the Iranian nuclear program that Trump did last year didn't really have the worst case scenario. The Maduro capture didn't really have the worst case scenario. So he might be emboldened. But Nate Swanson essentially makes, I think, a very compelling case that, no, Iran now recognizes that the only way to stop Israel and the U.S. from just kind of hitting them repeatedly whenever they feel like it is to impose consequences on doing so.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I kind of liken this to the great stand at Dover River, because that's exactly like that is more or less the motivations behind Grand Prince Ivan's decision to just say, no, actually, like you say you're going to crush us unless we pay tribute. Okay, well, here we are. Why don't you just crush us then? Like, the issue here, like America has been driven into, it's time to put up or shut up. And like this has caused amazing consternation in Washington. And I'm not just like saying this, I'm not doing a bunch of inductive reasoning here. The Americans themselves are just saying this openly. Steve Witkoff was just saying, like, the president is very frustrated. Like, we have this great American horde, all of these ships, all of these planes, and the president is frustrated. And he says, quote, I don't want to use the word capitulation, but the president is wondering, why haven't they capitulated yet? Why are these dumb Russians firing arrows at us when we try to cross the Ugra River? Don't they realize we're the great Tatar horde? And the issue here is, and this is kind of like, you can read this in foreign policy and so on, even if you have to sort of get past the official Pravda language. A problem for the US is that the US cannot take casualties anymore. Like, they cannot afford to fight. They have one fight left in them, and that's it. So the US has 2 aircraft carriers in the Middle East right now. One of them has a huge problem with like 60% of the toilets being clogged. And that's really just a symptom of like the entire carrier falling apart, because it's been, normally you don't want to deploy a carrier longer than 6 months. And especially for the Ford class, which is the newest one and the most mechanically unreliable carrier, if you deploy it longer than 6 months, the carrier starts falling apart. Like, military equipment is generally not built to be like, it's not like a car that you own, where it's like, I'm going to drive this sucker for 2 or 5 or 10 years, and then maybe I'll go to the mechanic once. And if I can't do that, like, it's a piece of shit car. No, like a tank, you can drive it for 2 or maybe 5 days, and then you go to the mechanic. And this is just like accepted. Like, these things are built for other things than mechanical reliability. And that's not even going into the human cost of being on deployment on a like really small metal box. I mean, a carrier is huge, but there's like over 4,000 people on it. And as far as towns of 4,000 people go, you will not find a town anywhere on planet Earth that's smaller than a carrier. In fact, I think the smallest town of 4,000 people is like 10 times bigger than a carrier or something. Like, people are crammed together like sardines, and they're missing they're working like 16 hours a day, 17 hours a day, and they can't see their families. They're like, can't see their children being born and so on.
They can't go to McDonald's, which is really difficult for Americans.
Yeah, exactly. They can't go to Applebee's either. But like the thing here is, like, having a carrier with broken toilets, and that's like 9 months into deployment, and giving it another deployment order, this is a sign that the US has no other carrier available. And that is like, the cupboard is bare. The US has 2 working carriers right now. In theory, there's a third one, the George W. Bush, who is undergoing so-called COM2X, like the COM2X phase, which stands for like composite unit training exercise or whatever. But basically, you could, in theory, just have told the Bush to do this. And that would have been a lot less like, cutting down the pre-deployment exercise by a couple of weeks. I mean, that's not great. It's much better than extending the deployment of the Ford, like much, much better, orders of magnitude better. But they didn't. And I think the reason, like the word on the street in Washington, is that the Bush is so broken that you can't actually deploy it. So like, you can't really push this military any further. This is really the last hurrah, in a way, for a really antiquated way of warfare also. And I should just, so people understand like the scales involved, I have to give some numbers. So if you think about like bombing campaigns during World War II, like the bombing campaign against Germany. Germany is a country which is 1/5 the size of Iran. The Allies used maybe 100,000 aircraft or whatever, on and off, if you put all the Allies together in like the various air campaigns against Germany. 100,000. And if you think about like production numbers for bombing aircraft during World War II, just one model of plane, like the B-17 bomber, the so-called Flying Fortress. I mean, the B-17 had at least 11,000 units produced, and that's just one bomber. So if you put together all the other bombers the US produced, it's like at least 50,000, at least. I think it's far more than that, but I don't have the numbers in my head right now. And then you look at Vietnam. In Vietnam, they used all of these bombing campaigns against North Vietnam. Like people are familiar with the Christmas bombings, Operation Linebacker, Linebacker 2. The Christmas bombings, which used B-52, which is the so-called Strata Fortress, which is the bomber the US still uses as its like principal strategic bomber at this point. During 10 days of so-called the Christmas bombing campaign, the US lost 15 B-52s shot down by enemy action, and then like 6 more that were severely damaged and probably out of service, and then 5 on top of that were moderately damaged. So putting together the destroyed and the damaged, we're talking almost 40 bombers for 10 days. Vietnam is also much smaller than Iran, and it had less modern air defenses than Iran does today. Okay, so I'm giving you these numbers. How many B-52s does the US have today? 2026. Well, officially, it's 75 bombers. Officially. But you have to realize that having 75 on the active list, that doesn't mean you have 75 that you can use. The B-52 is an ancient plane. It's like 65 years old. And I'm not talking about the model here. I'm talking about the mechanical body of the airplane. Like the last airplane was produced in the 1950s, okay? These are not spring chickens. So you have 75 on active service, but a significant number of these are only exist to provide spare parts. Like they are never going to fly again. They're just there to be cannibalized by other planes. And then you think about the ones that aren't like that are theoretically supposed to fly. And maybe 40% of them can fly at any one time. So generally speaking, the US has at most 40 B-52s that they can actually press into combat. 40. That's one Christmas bombing campaign. And then you can't do it anymore. And you can't make any new ones because, again, the last person who knew how to make a B-52 probably died, 20 years ago or something. Like, nobody today is alive, probably, who actually worked on a B-52 production line. And
so what is their strategy then? They must have some plan, right? I mean, they must think that they can
No, they
win
don't.
or...
They don't. Like, the thing is that that's why we are in this really weird position where the Iranians are saying, well, look, you're the Tatar horde. You came here. You said you want to destroy us. Well, look, we gathered an army. Let's have a battle. And the Americans are just going like, are you sure you don't want to capitulate? Are you sure? You don't really mean you want to fight us, right? Like, that's just ridiculous. Like, how could you fight us? Are you... No, like, come on. Like, sure, we're going to lose in 5 minutes or whatever because you're the invincible Tatar horde. But, I mean, you came all this way. Let's have a battle. Do you really mean that? Like, it's just this really weird position because, again, the point here, like if we're going to steelman the American argument, what they want is an air campaign that collapses the government. So they're going to do bombing from the air, and they're going to bomb the country enough that the will to fight collapses and the government like falls apart. This was a big thing after World War I. Like, this was a big theory. There were like Italian and British military theorists who basically conceived of strategic bombing as a way to basically avoid fighting conventional wars because you could bring so much destructive power against a country that their will to fight would collapse. This is why I brought up like these figures. Because when these people talked about strategic bombing in the 1910s and 1920s, they were envisioning like sending 200,000 planes or 100,000 planes against Germany. They weren't envisioning, well, if we send 15 planes against a country 5 times the size of Germany, that's strategic bombing. They would have laughed in your face if you brought that kind of numbers game to the discussion. No, like strategic bombing, it means destroying the country outright. You can't destroy a country with 20 planes. But America, I mean, it can't really produce 100,000 planes anymore. So you're stuck with this conception of strategic bombing, which, elephant in the room here, it has never worked. Even when you had 100,000 planes, like, it wasn't like the Germans didn't give up because they were bombed by airplanes. The British didn't give up when they were bombed during the Blitz. The North Koreans did not give up, even though the American Air Force basically bombed North Korea 10 times harder on average, like per capita, than Germany was bombed. Like, it's never worked in the history of the human species. And when you think about something like the most perfect setup for American air warfare, which is probably Yugoslavia, where America had just won the Cold War, and they had like Cold War technology that was genuinely relatively new at that point. They had a 72-day air campaign against the Yugoslavians, who couldn't shoot back at the Americans, really, and weren't interested in shooting back. And eventually they just realized this shit doesn't work. Like, the Yugoslavians actually shot down a stealth aircraft, the so-called F-117 Nighthawk, which they still have in their military museum in Belgrade or whatever. And they made like posters saying, sorry, we didn't know this thing was invisible before we shot it down. And like, this caused great consternation. The US was forced to go to Boris Yeltsin and tell the Russians to basically force the Milosevic government to accept a deal so that the US could declare victory. Well, I mean, that was America at the peak of its post-war power against a tiny country in Europe without much in the way of air defense compared to Iran, which is truly gigantic and which is receiving support from Russia and China.
We should just mention the diplomatic situation. So supposedly tomorrow, February 26th, Thursday, the Iranian foreign minister is going to meet in Geneva with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the greatest minds in American diplomacy. Basically, I think we can predict that no real deal is going to come out of this unless Trump... Because the Iranians have said they're willing to talk on the nuclear program, but they're not going to include the ballistic missiles program in the negotiations. That makes them a non-starter for Israel. As we mentioned, Iran very justifiably views their ballistic missiles program as existential. It was the only thing that allowed them to stay alive in the 12-day war, to inflict real damage on Israel. And Trump in the State of the Union, which I didn't watch because it was 2 hours, but I got some clips of it. Trump essentially said that Iran is building ballistic missiles that could hit the United States, quote, working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States, unquote. And so, somebody in Trump's ear is telling him that the ballistic missiles have to go as well because they could, deliver a nuke to the U.S. So I just, I don't see any face-saving way out of this unless Trump is willing to just kind of take an Obama-type deal exclusively on the nuclear program. They're not going to deal on the ballistic missiles at all. Oh, and Trump said on February 19th, he said he was giving Iran 10 to 15 days to make a deal, which is why general expectation is if this pops off, it'll pop off in the first week of March.
Yeah. I mean, the problem here is just that the U.S. is trying to hold on to its empire. That's one part. Like, so much credibility has been invested in this that if America backs down, nobody is going to pay taxes to the Tatars anymore. Like, that's not going to happen. Because they have themselves made it into this make or break thing. But they made it a make or break thing because, like, this isn't about American interests. This is about Israel at the end of the day. Like, it's about making sure that America or Iran doesn't have ballistic missiles with the range to hit Israel. It's fine if they have missiles that can completely destroy, like, the American bases in the region. That doesn't matter one iota to the American negotiators. Like, feel free to destroy Prince Sultan and Al Udeid and so on, and the headquarters of CENTCOM. But, oh my God, no, like, we can't actually allow you to have ballistic missiles anymore. And this demand only appears after the 12-day war, where Israel attacks Iran, saying, like, these ballistic missiles, what are they going to do? Fire them at Tel Aviv? Like, these are, like, Ahmed the dead terrorist, like, homemade, firecrackers. Who cares? Like, we can shoot them down with our missile defense. And then it turns out that these ballistic missiles are a bit more of a threat than people assumed. And at the end of the 12-day war, it's the Iranians who have the last strike, number one. And it's pretty much openly acknowledged that it was the Israelis who basically tapped the mat and said, like, please, Americans, you have to help us get a peace deal here. Like, we can't deal with this attack anymore. So, I mean, this is just done on behalf of Israel, and there's no effort to sell this to the American people as, like, they're not even trying to do the Iraq. Like, it's the most perfunctory preparation for war that you've ever seen in American media. They basically don't even talk about it, which is funny because, again, this is a country that is, I don't know, like 3 to 5 times more powerful than Iraq. Like, if we think about the territory, it's much bigger. It's like 5 or 6 times bigger than Iraq. If you think about the population, it's like almost 4 times bigger than Iraq's population at the start of the Iraq invasion. If we think about, like, the stability of the political system, it's incomparable. If we think about the amount of ability to inflict damage on American bases and ships and planes, it's incomparable. So this is, like, legit. And the biggest war the US would be involved in since World War II. Like, this is bigger than Vietnam, just in terms of the numbers. Yeah, there's not going to be any, like, ground invasion or whatever, but that's just because the US doesn't have the ability to do a ground invasion. It doesn't have, like, ships to transport soldiers, and it doesn't have soldiers to transport. Like, they couldn't actually get tanks into Iran because there would be no way to actually refuel the tanks.
They may have also been hoping that the protests, would turn into something, right? That they would topple the government or something.
Yeah. But I mean, that they obviously had like a lot of sort of agents and like all of these Starlink terminals and smuggled weapons and so on. But then they blew it all without like the military, like the Air Force and so on to be able to support it. So now like those assets are heavily attrited and they won't be able to recruit new ones. And again, like if you do, they have these parades in Iran that commemorate like the start or the completion of the Islamic Revolution. So it's kind of like the Iran's 1st of May day, like. And if you look at that, if you look at the numbers, they were the most sort of visited Iranian May Day parades they've ever had. Like they were twice as big as last year. And you saw people doing interviews, and it's a lot of like, you know, progressive women without a hijab saying like, I've never been to one of these things before, but it's like, this time it's different. This time it's about like my pride as an Iranian and like standing up for my people and my country. And of course, I'm going to show up for that. So, I mean, the Iranian regime has always been pretty deft in that they have 2 tracks of loyalty that they can call upon. The first is, you know, Shia Islam, which is incredibly sort of preoccupied with martyrdom and sort of fighting a futile struggle. Like the best thing you can do in Shia Islam is to fight a war where you're outnumbered 100-1, where you know you're going to die. Like the person who says, I don't care, make it 1,000-1, I'm still going to fight. And if I die, yeah, well, you know, that's just part of being, you know, an upstanding human being. That person is the most admirable person within Shia Islam. So they can always mobilize that because it's quite powerful, which is also why these ideas of like killing the Ayatollah and so on. Like this guy is 86-year-old and he's the like principal or penultimate leader of a world religion that says if you're killed by the enemy that like shamefully assassinates you, congratulations, you get to jump the queue into paradise. Like the idea that if you killed Shia Muslims upon seeing a religious leader attain the most holy form of death possible within the religion, go, oh, I don't believe in this anymore. It's so like Americans are just so fucking retarded.
Well, speaking of that, I have a great example, and I have maybe a counter argument, a devil's advocate to everything Malcolm's saying here. We have right-wing commentator Matt Forney on Twitter. I'm just going to quote about half of his post here. He quotes another post. He says, it's a good post on the necessity of destroying Iran. Spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with Israel. China is going to declare war on the U.S. in the next 5 years. They want vengeance on the white man for the century of humiliation. But unlike America, which can seal itself off from the outside world and be self-sufficient, China lacks key resources like oil that can sustain a military-industrial complex or modern economy for that matter. Iran is one of their key sources of oil. Iran is such a degenerate, failed state, a literal gerontocracy run by men in their 80s, large sections of the population infertile due to STDs, a heroin epidemic. It's like, yeah, this is the United States you're talking about. But that we can probably just vaporize Khomeini from orbit, put Reza Pahlavi back on the throne, and that will be it. China is already failing. Their middle class is wiped out. Their tariffs have crushed their economy, and we're no longer importing from them. Trump is giving them just a little push. And it reminds me of something somebody else said, which is we only have to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will collapse.
Yeah, and let's think about this clearly. Like, which country is on the precipice of collapse? Like, again, you had protests in Iran. That much is very true. And those protests, like, there were a kernel of actual grievance there, which had to do with, like, the collapse of the currency, which happened as a result of, Scott Bessent, or basalt, or however you pronounce it. Like, he went out and said this, like, yeah, we did this. We did this to Iran as part of a strategy to collapse the Iranian economy. And then you had a lot of like foreign infiltration, which again, you can read in like the American mainstream media. And you had senators saying like, our prayers are with the brave Mossad agents who are out on the streets of Tehran right now. So this isn't particularly, this isn't even a subtext. But yeah, you have these things, but there's no protests going on right now. And again, the other leg of that the Iranian government can rely on is Persian nationalism. This is one of the most fanatically nationalist peoples in the world. And my comment about Americans being retarded is just that, like, Americans have no interest. And so their ability is also been atrophied. But they have no interest in ever thinking, okay, well, how would I react if this happened to me? And if you do this sort of counterfactual where you have China saying, okay, America has to disarm its military, or we will use our control of antibiotics or whatever. We will basically try to starve the American people to death. If you ask people how they would react, they would say, I don't really care if I personally starve to death. Like, once Xi Jinping says that, yeah, I'll starve to death on principle, you fucking Chinese communist. Like, you can't come here to America and tell us that we live or die just like on the Chinese Communist Party say so. No, like, give me liberty or give me death. That's how Americans say they would react. But obviously it doesn't work that way for any other people in the world, because only Americans exist. Everyone else is just like kind of an NPC in a video game or whatever, where it's like, unless the particular stage is loaded into memory, like, they literally don't exist. And again, like, the US is the really politically and militarily weak country in this confrontation. It's politically weak because, number one, it's internally divided. Number two, it's militarily like, or rather, like, it lacks any sort of institutions that people trust in outside of the military. Like, that's the one remaining institution people have some sort of semblance of trust left in. And also, the economy is fucking collapsing. The US governmental debt, people have given up trying to fix the deficit. So it's only maybe 5 or 10 years maximum until you have a collapse of the dollar as a usable currency, because the only way to pay off the American national debt is to hyperinflate the currency away. But the thing is, America is also running a constant budget deficit, and you can never solve those things by hyperinflation, because if you're running a $2 billion deficit and you use hyperinflation, you're just going to be running a $2 million trillion deficit the next year, but it's still going to be the same amount of like actual resources. And so the only way to solve this deficit problem is to completely collapse the American living standard by maybe 25%. How do you think Americans will react if their living standards collapse by 25% on top of a military defeat?
Well, we were talking about where things go if the U.S. does launch this, because I think you're right. It would destroy the United States as it currently exists. I do not think we could survive a war with Iran. And also, yeah, I was talking recently with a friend about the high levels of trust people still have in the U.S. military. In terms of a collapse of the U.S. scenario, I think the military is the obvious candidate for who steps up and fills the gap. But I guess it's an open question as to whether it's, a Pinochet who just makes Americans accept 25% reduction in living standards at gunpoint, or, some lieutenant colonel with more Chavista type ideals in, of course, my fantasy. But yeah, it's it's something where I'm very much hoping that Trump will back down, but I think Israel recognizes that this is their last chance to get it done. So if Trump's not going to do it, they'll just put JD Vance in to do it. I think this is happening this year.
Yeah, and the thing is, I don't think that U.S. military as an institution has the juice to keep the country together. I think the U.S. military is basically dumb. I mean, if you look at the way it actually functions internally, the smart people, they're not like plotting, like the colonels aren't plotting some sort of coup. They're just quitting the force. When I was in Washington the first time, speaking at the Elliott Schools program, they had this like educational program for high level civil servants and people of colonel rank inside the U.S. military. And I mean, there was one guy who had like the top marks for whatever, like army. The army has much more like internal, like a culture of like constant education compared to the Navy, for example. But like this was a guy with top marks, like the military's equivalent to a valedictorian. And like we kind of have a conversation, and after that, like one of my guides just says, that guy you talked to, I mean, this is like his last week in the military. Like he is number one on the promotion track to brigadier general, but he's just gonna leave because he can't deal with this institution anymore. So that's kind of my sense of where the U.S. military is at. Like generals are just politicians. Like they are angling for their big payout from an arms manufacturing company. They won't lift a fucking finger to do anything. And colonels, they are beaten down, and they don't really think they have the ability or the resources or even the inclination to try to keep the country together if it starts coming apart at the seams. And if you look down at the lower levels, at the enlisted and so on, I mean, you saw the military parade, right? These people that they got from Fort Bragg, I mean, they're doing like drug smuggling and human trafficking and like gangland style murders of each other at Fort Bragg. I mean, they're looting the armories and selling like grenade launchers and shit to cartels. These people they aren't gonna stand up like patriotically for the Republic or whatever. They're just gonna twiddle their thumbs or kill each other over like heroin or whatever as the Republic falls apart. The military is not coming to save you, America. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but if you hope for a colonel, whether of the fascistic or the chauvinistic disposition, you're going to be waiting a very long time.
It's interesting that a lot of former colonels who have that in their title are usually in the public eye because they're critical of something the government is doing or something the army is doing. They're normally like there as a critic of it.
Yeah. Well, if it's a former general, they're generally a booster. Like that's the pattern. So you have, I mean, if you look at YouTube, you have like Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who I actually held a panel discussion together with last summer, which was kind of nerve-wracking. But because like, who am I to speak next to this guy, right? But we got along pretty well, I think. But I mean, you have Wilkerson, you have Douglas McGregor, you have this other guy, what's his name? Daniel Davis. Then you have a couple of others. So like, very few colonels that I've seen that are actually saying like, yeah, we're on the right track here. I mean, these people kind of know. Because they haven't made a transition into becoming politicians. So like the colonel levels, they know that things are completely busted. But I mean, if you just look at like this war with Iran, all the war goals here are just messed up. Americans have the war goal, like in the Clausewitzian sense of war is just the continuation of politics. The political goal of America is the collapse of the Iranian state using air power. This has never happened in human history. And the war goal for Iran is for a thing that has never happened in human history to not happen to them. So, I mean, if you have, like, the war goal, don't be killed by the Tooth Fairy. That's a pretty easy war goal to accomplish. Because, I mean, the Tooth Fairy isn't out there with a knife gunning for you. The Tooth Fairy doesn't exist. So not being killed by the Tooth Fairy, pretty easy. And we have an example of this. I mean, the war goal of the Houthis was don't be killed by the Tooth Fairy. And the Tooth Fairy didn't come for the Houthis, which means that the US military eventually, after 1 month of Operation Rough Rider, they basically said, the Houthis have said they're gonna surrender, so that's why we're leaving. And the Houthis just said, yeah, if by surrender you mean we're gonna keep doing the thing, which is shooting at boats, that made you go to war with us, yes, we're surrendering. But if you by surrender mean we're gonna stop, or we're gonna do the thing you asked us to do, and started this operation for, fuck you, like, we're gonna keep doing it. So again, the Houthis, I mean, the US in theory could do a pretty good air campaign against the Houthis, because this is one of the poorest countries in the world, number one. And it's not even the whole of the country, it's like 2/3 of the country. Because the other parts are controlled by, like, this Saudi-backed sort of government. But we're seeing leaks now in the newspapers basically saying that, yeah, the US basically acted like Yemen didn't have air defense for a week or so. But then the Yemenis basically did these sandbushes, as they're called. Basically, they have surface-fire missiles, and they don't turn on the radars until the planes are just overhead. And then they fire the missiles at very short range, so you don't have much time to react. And this happened like one time, and you almost lost a couple of planes over it. They just managed to dodge the missiles. And after that, the Americans said, okay, we're done. From now on, we're only going to launch like cruise missiles from out of range, because like even the Houthis can shoot our planes now. And the problem here is just that, like, if this was World War II, and you know, the Germans did like a flak cannon ambush or whatever against fighter planes or bombers, who fucking cares? It's a war, bro. You're gonna lose bombers. But we can make 20,000 of them in a year. So if you're telling me, no, we're gonna stop bombing Germany because the Germans, they used one of their anti-aircraft cannons to shoot down a plane, get the fuck out of here. Like, war is about people dying and equipment being destroyed. Like, that's how you know you're fighting a war. But today, like, the elephant in the room is that the US can't actually, like, if it loses a pilot, it can't replace it because it doesn't have the money or the time, or even the people willing to join to become pilots. If it loses a plane, in most cases, the plane is no longer being manufactured. F-22s are not manufactured, B-52s are not manufactured, B-2s, same there. Tanker aircraft, they're not making anymore. Airlift, like heavy cargo planes, they're not making anymore, C-5s or C-17s. They're not making any more of basically any fucking thing. They're not making any more Tomahawks. So if they shoot a Tomahawk missile, sorry, that's one less missile permanently. And there's not really any money to like develop new things because the America's going broke. So it's just like this incredibly brittle force, which they're pushing to the limit. And once there's a fight, it's not going to be that Iran, blows up all of America in like 24 hours or kills like 500,000 Americans or even 5,000 Americans in like a week. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is a big old nothing burger where it turns out that war is people shooting at each other and people on both sides dying. Iran can deal with people shooting at each other and both sides dying for, 5 years. America, and this is said openly in the media. This is said openly in foreign policy in New York Times, in the Washington Post, by generals, by political pundits. America has a pain tolerance of people shooting at each other and both sides losing people. That's like 5 days.
I wanted to talk about the soft power. These right-wingers think it's all gay and it doesn't matter and you can just do force and everything. But I think it's going back to the point of they're not even bothering to sell this war. I mean, on the eve of the Iraq War, something like 90% of Americans or 75% thought Iraq did 9/11. And I think just at the end of the day, you can't actually get people to fight and die for you just for money or under threat. They have to, if they're actually going to lay down their lives in significant number, they have to believe in what they're doing. Because if you're simply being paid or cajoled, you're not going to make the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah.
So I think the collapse, and you see this everywhere in the United States now that our entire economy is just crypto scams and gambling and drugs and OnlyFans, everybody's just getting rich by ripping off or making their neighbors' lives worse.
Yeah.
Like this kind of complete collapse in the belief in everything just 20 years ago people believed about America. I don't see how you can actually sustain a fighting force anymore.
Yeah, there's this really interesting attitude you see now where you have these sailors on the USS Gerald Ford and they've been over deployment. You have to realize if you're in the Navy today or even in the Army, your deployment schedule is worse than the worst months of the combined global war on terror, during the Iraq surge. You are working longer hours and doing more rotations and longer deployments than during the peak of the global war on terror. That's just normality these days. And you have these Americans saying, these patriotic Americans, they knew what they were signing up for overall. They're going to be out there for 12 years on their fucking carrier. And they're not going to complain because they're they otherwise they wouldn't have signed up. This stuff is a job. It's not about patriotic, blah, blah, blah. It's you join the Navy if you have nothing else going on. And the Navy knows that and the Navy leans into that. They say, this is a job you can do in this shitty crypto scam-filled economy where you actually get something out of it. And so saying, no, having these civilians basically treat soldiers as the help staff, where it's you can treat them however you want because they're just the servants. That is so incredibly unhealthy. Because that's not the actual social contract of a sort of professional military force. In a professional military force, you have to treat the soldiers pretty well. You have to give them benefits and you have to give them decent hours. You have to treat them as employees at any sort of company because that's what they are. And if you say, we want people to be motivated by patriotism and so on and not material concerns, then you have a conscript army of citizen soldiers where nobody is a couch potato and where everybody fights. You can't treat these people as fucking illegal DoorDash drivers. I'm going to leave a 1-star review of this carrier crew because they didn't really do what Mark Levin wanted them to do. So I'm gonna call their manager. If you do this, you're not going to have a crew for your carrier anymore. They're going to quit. which is what a lot of these sailors are going to do the moment they get home from this deployment. They're going to hand in their fucking papers because they are sick and tired of being treated like slaves.
Well, I just want to stay on the USS Gerald Ford for 1 minute because I think it does fit into two things you've said, Malcolm, both on this podcast and in your writings elsewhere, where assuming we get into a shooting war with Iran, you will see U.S. soldiers and sailors committing mutinies, and also that the U.S. military is falling apart at the seams. But so the Jerusalem Post says USS Gerald Ford is the largest aircraft carrier in the world. It's supposed to arrive in Haifa, Israel on Monday. It was supposed to be there already, but they had to stop in Greece because, as we mentioned, the toilets are overflowing. Sailors were waiting 45 minutes to go to the bathroom. And, but, you know, it was just launched in 2013. By U.S. military standards, it's pretty fucking new. And the point that they were making is because these deployments are so long, we don't know exactly why, but sailors seem to be, you know, flushing T-shirts and 4 feet length ropes and papers down the toilets. And so it's not clear if it's just, you know, morale is just so low because they've been deployed for so long that they're just kind of pissed off at doing this, or if there's like a more intentional kind of mutiny in terms of like flushing these objects down the toilet because they don't want to go die for Israel or whatever. But it seems like, you know, the Global Times is a Chinese paper. They quote Wang Yongfei as a Chinese military affairs expert, and he basically argues that the vacuum sewage systems used in the USS Gerald Ford are an advanced technology. However, they depend on strict compliance with operating regulations by crew members. And he makes the point that these long deployments it seems like this long deployment is having a stress effect where the crew members are not following these strict regulations anymore. So I think it is an early sign of you know, something before mutiny. And if U.S. soldiers start actually getting killed with Iranian missiles, I think you'll see like much more open mutiny.
Yeah, I see both sides of this because, I mean, people shouldn't underestimate just how dysfunctional, like, the normal sort of American enlisted person is. Like, just how these are the kinds of people, sometimes at least, that would say, yeah, like, what's the problem if I flush a length of industrial rope down the toilet? Like, what's the worst that could happen? So there is that aspect that one shouldn't minimize. But there's also like, yeah, I think some of this, maybe even most of it, is probably like motivated, if not like politically, then at least like, I kind of want to see this whole thing burn down because like I am so sick and tired of this. But like, I remember when I was following this stuff much more intensely, listening to a congressional hearing with the then Undersecretary of the Navy, Philip K. Raven, where he did this preamble speech where he said, even though the U.S. Navy is the most advanced Navy with the best ships, the newest and most modern ships, spoiler alert, this is not true, in the world, we aren't about technology. We aren't about any of that. Like this is just icing on the cake. What China will never be able to compete with is the American sailor, who is like the perfect warfighter, who is the most dedicated, brave, intelligent sailor that has ever existed on the planet. And he did this as a sort of preamble, you know, like, honored gentlemen, like, I come to you today to blah, blah, blah. You know what the topic of the discussion was? The Navy's decision to allow class 4 sort of students or test takers for the like this cognitive test that the Army does or the military does, the ASVAB. To allow class 4 candidates to join the Navy. And if you don't know what a class 4 candidate is, it's Forrest Gump. He is literally a class 4 candidate, which means that he scores between the 20th and 40th percent of test takers on the ASVAB. because officially Forrest Gump has an IQ of like 79, which is roughly what the people ending up at like in the 25th percentile of the ASWAB have. So Philip K. Raymond, like having these people in the Navy was up until fairly recently like not allowed. And having class ones, which is like the lowest 20%, like that is illegal by statute. Like that is, you cannot have these people in the military. It is not allowed by the law. But like the people just above that level were not allowed by internal convention inside the military, because this was tried in Vietnam for a program which got the name McNamara's Morons, where this is what, like Forrest Gump is part of McNamara's Morons, like the effort to basically bolster the forces on the ground. Like this is the actual sort of backstory to Forrest Gump. They had a program like that. Like it's not, it actually existed. People with his intelligence, like Forrest Gump is a fictional character, but people like Forrest Gump were serving in Vietnam. And this was such a disaster program that they basically said, okay, well, we're going to make this not allowed anymore. Well, the Navy brought Forrest Gump back to the Navy in the mid-years of the Biden admin, because they had such a recruitment crisis. And the Army basically said, yeah, we're not going to do that. Like, we tried that once, but it's such a disaster. You can't have people with like sub 80 IQ serving on a military ship. Like you can't have that. It just doesn't work. But you have to realize that this is how America works. Like this is Americana 100%, where you have Undersecretary Raven going up and talking up like the unique high intelligence and warfighting capability of the American sailor as he defends why they should let in literally like legally mentally retarded people who have like a special legal status or can apply for it because of their low intelligence, why these people should be allowed into the American Navy. They're not allowed into basically any Navy else on the planet at this point.
So when you say Americans are retarded...
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, I mean, in general, I would say even Americans of high intelligence are retarded, because like there's a difference in Dungeons and Dragons between intelligence and wisdom. But like what fascinates me with the US is that you can't actually go up to Congress and say, yeah, times are pretty bad right now, so we're actually lowering standards. You have to give this like racist spiel about how Chinese people are really stupid and can't ever like hope to match with the superior intelligence of the American man, while you then say, yeah, we're going to let in like absolute fucking retards into the Navy. And we know it's going to destroy the Navy, but like we have no other choice. Like this is worse than the Soviet Union.
You know how sometimes you see these maps of American military bases all over the world, and it seems like there must be hundreds of them. There must then be a lot of actual people, just sheer numbers, deployed in these things. What kind of numbers? Do you have any idea of what kind of ballpark numbers you're talking about? Like, you take, for example, you'd often hear them talking about being on a military base in Germany or something like that, right? Those kind of ones. Like, is it just that they need so many people that it's like overstretched?
Yeah, they need so many people, but it's also like they need so many people for reasons that have to do with, like, this is an institution that is outdated, but doesn't have like the sort of vitality to reform itself. So in terms of numbers, just for the Middle East during peacetime, it's like 45,000 people across like the big bases in Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. And now, I don't know how many it is, but it's like at least 10,000 more. They've evacuated maybe a couple of thousand non-relevant personnel, but they brought in like a lot of air defense operators and so on. So it's much more. But
I assume Israel must have a plan, though, if this goes badly. Do you have any sense of what that is? Like, if they're putting pressure on the Americans to just go, even if it's a suicide mission, like, what's the plan if it goes badly? For what happens to Israel?
I think the defining sort of aspect of Israel is that it's a country that genuinely doesn't have a plan. I mean, David Graeber wrote a piece about this where he visited the West Bank, and this was like 2014 or whatever. And the main takeaway of that article is he's like going there going, like, none of this will be able to exist if America goes away. And I mean, this was less acute in the like 2014, but like even smart people like Graeber kind of said, and like everyone kind of realized that like America isn't here forever. Like China is rising. Someday they're gonna, like, America won't be around anymore. And Graeber just talks to people and he said, like, what's your plan? And like the response he got was just, no, there is no plan. We're gonna go with this. We'll see what happens. Like, it's all in God's hands. So no, I think they're basically desperate just because they haven't really made any other sort of plans whatsoever. I mean, there are dreams, like maybe India can become the new America, or maybe China will discover philosemitism or whatever. But, you should have started working on that 100 years ago if you wanted it to be like done today. This is like trying to study for a test on the bus to the test locale. Like it's a bit too late. But I mean, like what you kind of have to realize with the US military is just that, like, we talked a lot about planes and so on. But I mean, planes are an outdated technology in a lot of ways. Like there's one guy inside the US Navy, like a pretty high up guy, just now wrote an article saying, like, we need the new fighter F-A XX, which is like fighter attack, the designation for carrier-borne aircraft, like the Hornet. We need, and XX just means it's like an experimental program. Like, we need this new magical new stealth fighter program. We need to spend as much money as it takes on that, because right now we can't use planes to sort of bomb a place like Tehran, because they can just shoot our planes down from the air.
You know, I never realized the Fourth Reich comparisons would be so literal, because this is all Hitler was talking about, is magic weapons that would win the war. We need Tiger tanks and V2s, and that'll fix everything.
Yeah, and it's like, the thing is, if you just have a missile, because at this point, like, what planes do is that they fire missiles, like dropping like these dumb gravity bombs. Yeah, it works on Gaza and it works on Lebanon because, you have the US making sure that, like, nobody in Lebanon, not even the Lebanese military, is allowed to have any sort of anti-aircraft capability. But if you can't drop down bombs without being shot down, it's like official Air Force doctrine is that B-52s are not allowed to actually drop down gravity bombs anymore. They are literally not allowed to do that. They are only allowed to stay like 1,000 miles away and firing, cruise missiles from the air. Because if they get any closer, like, these are huge, oversized civilian airliners that fly at comparable speeds and with, comparable radar signatures. You could shoot that shit down with like a World War II flak cannon. You could shoot that stuff down very easily with like a missile from the 1960s. You could shoot it down even easier with like loitering SAMs and so on, which is like basically like a drone that is also an anti-aircraft missile. It just stays up in the air until it activates and chases after a plane. Like, these planes cannot be used in that way. But the thing is, when you say we need a new wonder, like a stealth plane that allows us to bomb Tehran without being shot down, like you kind of have to realize the Iranians, they don't build a plane to fire a missile, they just build a missile. And at that point, when you just build a missile, even if they shoot it down, you win, because the missiles that shoot down other missiles are like 5 times as expensive as the missiles they're shooting down. So even if the missile gets shot down, that's a W. But like, you know, a plane getting shot down, that's like a catastrophic loss, an irreplaceable loss. And so the reason America doesn't build missiles is because it has all of these entrenched interests. Like if you want to be an admiral in the US Navy, like one of the best ways to get there is to be a naval aviator. And you have all of these, like, people have invested their entire careers in aircraft to go on carriers. And if you tell the pilots, sorry, your time is done, that's like telling the German knights that, like, okay, we have gunpowder weapons, we have pike and shot now. We don't really need to build our entire social order around having, like, all these small estates with like 20 peasant families working on behalf of one knightly family whose duties to the king is to produce like 1.5 heavy armored cavalry. Like, we don't really use that much heavy armored cavalry anymore. Like, we have pikes and we have muskets. If you say that to the German knights, you know what you're gonna get? You're gonna get like the German Knights War, where the knights discover, holy shit, like, they don't want us anymore. Our social position is no longer maintainable. So unless we take matters into our own hands, there won't really be knights anymore in Germany in 50 years. I mean, they took matters into their own hands and they lost, and eventually there were no knights. Pilots are just American knights. They are not interested in having, you know, a new missile program and maybe retiring, like all of these. Like, they won't have jobs, and they won't have prestige and status, and they won't have promotion opportunities.
Well, last thing I wanted to kind of ask you just on Iran is, I guess, what, assuming worst case scenario happens here, and it is so weird in the US because it all feels very surreal because there's not any real debate about this, but it feels like we are actually on the edge of a cliff because, you know, me personally, I mean, if we are actually going to war with Iran, I will drop everything. I will protest. I will try to occupy, build, like that kind of thing. And maybe it's a waste of time. Maybe it has to come from rising prices, would get more people in the streets, that kind of thing. But I just don't see a scenario where Israel doesn't start using nuclear weapons. Like, maybe they'll deny it and call you anti-Semitic if you say that's what they're doing, or whatever the case may be. But it just seems, as far as we can understand, the Israeli goal with all of these conflicts has just been state collapse, you know, state collapse in Iraq, state collapse in Syria and Libya. So that's all they're really trying to achieve in Iran. And if it becomes clear that the Iranian state isn't collapsing, it just seems like eventually they're trying to kind of get Trump halfway pregnant, get him to like commit something, then there's some retaliation that kills US troops, then there's another retaliation, and things just kind of keep going. And if the Iranian state hasn't collapsed, I just don't see a scenario where, having, you know, committed genocide in Gaza, they wouldn't just go to their final option.
I mean they might, but the problem here is just that if you think a nuclear weapon is just a really big bomb, and oftentimes you get the same effect, or you get an even worse effect. I mean, Ted Postal made this point that, like, if you think about like the explosive power, like, you know, you have a nuclear bomb that's the equivalent of like 100,000 tons of TNT or whatever. Like, if you split that 100,000 tons of TNT up into many smaller bolts, you're going to kill more people than if you put it into a really big bomb for like reasons that have to do with like physics, basically. And the problem here is just that Israel has dropped the equivalent of like more, like they have dropped more explosive power in Gaza than the 2 nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at this point.
Yeah, like 10 times more, yeah.
Yeah, and like the problem here is just that like what has this done in terms of like winning over Hamas? It hasn't done as much as they hoped, clearly. And if you do that against Iran, if you drop like a nuclear bomb on Tehran, like that's obviously a humanitarian disaster. It's not really like a political or military disaster for Iran. Because one, if you do that, like you will never have to worry about like people saying, yeah, maybe we should quit this war. Like that's, you will never have to deal with that again. Like if someone tries to protest and say like, yeah, I hate the mullahs or whatever, like you will have like lib-torted Iranian women in, you know, with like keffiyehs and like rainbow handbags, basically like lynching these people on the street, like cutting their heads off, parading their heads off on pikes, like a scene out of the French Revolution. Like you will not be able to do any sort of anti-regime protest whatsoever in that country for a generation. Like you will be killed if you try. So that's a pretty big like political win in a sense. And if you think about like this in the military balance of power, I'll just add that like the reason North Korea has a bigger military, like in terms of soldiers and reserve soldiers, than the US has today, and North Korea is like 20 million people, that's because the US bombed them, they basically leveled every building in all of North Korea using airplanes. And that has been so like traumatic for the sort of national psyche that they have this incredibly hypertrophied military. But what it hasn't done is inspire a sense of defeatism. It's just like, if this happens, everyone will fight to the death. Like, so that's what you're going to do politically. But militarily, like Iran is a so-called threshold nuclear state, which is why they have like this highly enriched uranium. They don't need the highly enriched uranium for civilian purposes. Like everyone knows that, because you don't really use highly enriched uranium for civilian purposes. You use it to build a bomb. But they basically enrich to a level where it only takes a week to get actual like bomb grade material. They stop just at the line. And then they say, we're not really looking for a nuclear bomb, which is true, but they're not looking for a nuclear bomb in the sense that if they ever were to start looking for a nuclear bomb, it would take them a week. And if you nuke them, that fatwa saying that nuclear weapons are against, Islamic law, that fatwa is then abolished. Because once you get hit with a nuclear weapon, that sort of, that no longer applies. You have to be able to basically strike back with the same. So Israel knows that, like, you can't actually prevent the Iranians from developing and firing a nuclear bomb by using nuclear weapons against Iran. You can't. You would have to saturate the entire country with nuclear weapons, and that wouldn't really do anything, because, I mean, what is the protection against nuclear weapons? Like, what is the way to defend against nuclear weapons that we have known about and used in sort of great power states for a very long time now? So the US has this program called the Continuation of Government, which is all of these things like these installations and so on that are meant to make sure that the US government survives even in the case of an apocalyptic nuclear war. You know what they do? They build bases underneath mountains.
Yeah, Raven Rock.
Yeah, exactly. You know why? Because like 100 feet of packed earth will block basically infinite amounts of gamma radiation. So, I mean, and also a nuclear bomb, it's just like a big explosion that triggers in the air. You can't really do much against mountains with a big explosion that triggers in the air because it's just a fucking huge solid mass of rock. So the Iranians, they've figured it out. They've looked at the physics and they say, like, if you just build a fucking tunnel underneath a mountain, you're safe from nuclear weapons. So where are we putting our nuclear program? Underneath mountains. That's where the missiles are too. So like, you can't really do much. I'm not saying that Israel wouldn't use a nuclear weapon. And I'm not even saying that they wouldn't use a nuclear weapon against the population center. They might, because they're insane. But you have always to ask the question, okay, once you do that, what does doing that actually do? And my attempt at response here is just, it doesn't really do that much.
Well, again, my last question, I guess, is it is speculative, but you said, and I agree with you, a war with Iran would be the end of the U.S. as we currently understand it. So generally, what does that look like for you? Because I guess in my mind, I'm thinking there would probably be a month or two where we're all on the usual, there's a war over there, it doesn't really affect us. And then suddenly the prices start to rise. Then you start having protests that start to kind of disrupt the way of life over here. Then you have maybe a military mutiny. It just kind of unfolds slowly over the course of a few months. But what does the end of the U.S. look like to you?
I think that, like, you're basically going to see more of the same. Like, it will just be an acceleration of current trends, where what's going to happen in terms of like the war is just going to be a much bigger version of like the Operation Rough Rider, where yes, you have all of these cool videos of blowing targets up in the desert or mountains or whatever, but like you actually don't change anything. Like the Iranians, if they block the Strait of Hormuz, you're not going to be able to unblock it because like the way they will enforce the blockade is just to tell ships, you can sail through the Strait of Hormuz, and if you do, we're going to launch a fucking anti-ship cruise missile and sink you. But if you feel like you have some like Jet Li powers or whatever on your oil carrier, feel free to, take the gamble. They only have to say that, and like you will not be able to insure a carrier going through the Strait of Hormuz. And if you can't insure it, that means that if your carrier gets sunk when it's filled with oil, you're out like $100 million or whatever. Nobody is going to do that. They're just going to say, I can either send my ship for no reason at all and just take a gamble that these Iranians can't aim their missiles, or I can wait a couple of weeks or months or whatever, and I will lose zero money and I will still have my ship. And I won't be sued by the families of the sailors for like sending them out there. So nobody will be interested in sailing. And the only way to end this is to defeat Iran entirely. Like you can't actually like do escort. Like American warships will not do escorts through the Strait of Hormuz because American warships are far too afraid of being shot at by like Chinese missiles because they can't be sure that the Chinese aren't sending these missiles to Iran because they probably are. So you will have a lot of bluster, but nothing will really change. And eventually this stalemate, which is going to completely fuck over the global economy, is just going to be ended by basically America hoisting the white flag and saying, we're leaving because you aren't, like you, Grand Prince Ivan, you aren't even worthy of being like our enemy. Like we're the great Tatar horde. Like why would we fight a bunch of Russians? Like you are beneath us. And Grand Prince Ivan at that point will say, yeah, you're just saying that because you're fucking weak. Goodbye. Don't bother coming back next year for taxes because, like, come on. And like, if you think about this, people are already dumping US governmental bonds and so on. Things are just going to get worse economically. There's no support for this war. It can't be won because the war goals are just impossible and have never been fulfilled in human history before, even though America has tried with these same war goals against states with the fraction of the size of population when the US was 2 times as strong as it is today. But more generally, like if you think about a common refrain on Twitter, which is the Iranians or the Houthis are about to find out why we Americans don't have free healthcare. To me, that phrase really is the sort of herald of American national collapse. Because Americans can no longer think of themselves as anything else than like an imperial power. If you think about like American self-identity in the 17th century or the 18th century, like Americans saw themselves as an ethnicity, as a sense of we are weird English people, or we are like English people that care more about like the Magna Carta than the English people living in England. So just like the Romans were just like a tribe who happened to live in a city they called Rome, as the empire has grown, America has gone from being an ethnicity to being like a creed, a shared ideology that everyone who goes to America can like assimilate into. But today that is gone. That sense is gone. Like the halftime show with Bad Bunny, where they did a halftime show in Spanish, that kind of illustrated a real deep like sense of crisis among a lot of conservatives, where it's like, is this really our country? Like a bunch of Puerto Ricans. I mean, they're part of the empire. And these Puerto Ricans, the thing is, they don't see themselves as like you gringos or whatever. They see themselves as part of the empire. But the empire today, it's like Rome during the final phase, where it's like, it's not about acting like a Roman or building a bathhouse, because these, Goths and Germanics that fill our military ranks, like they don't care about bathhouses and they don't speak our language. And it's not about being part of the ethnicity, because that disappeared like hundreds of years ago. We are a multi-ethnic empire. Like anyone who wants can join as long as they believe. Like that's the phase we were in before the current phase. So now it's just being a Roman is identifying with Rome, paying taxes to Rome, like serving in the legions or whatever, or being proud of the legions. Or being American today, like Bad Bunny, he is in his own mind an American. Because why? Because he's part of, like, Puerto Rico has been, is administratively a part of the American empire. And Puerto Rico sends soldiers to serve in the Marine Corps and so on. But if you take away the Marine Corps, if you take away, like, the administration, what's there to keep Puerto Rico and Oklahoma and, like, Wyoming and Minnesota together? There's absolutely nothing.
You know how oftentimes in the Olympics, it's used as a way for great powers to kind of flex and like showcase their abilities, and it's always political, right? Well, I think it's really interesting that I that basically America's showcasing of itself geopolitically in the Winter Olympics has taken the form of like Asian test tube babies. I mean, I just don't think that's a coincidence. I think that because isn't this I mean, is this the imperial vision, right? That we're going to actually defeat China by creating like test tube superhumans that
Yeah,
are, yeah, or something like that.
yeah, exactly. And it's kind of desperate because people also get really mad because this Chinese test tube baby defected to China. Like that was a huge thing where like people were super mad at one of the like people born in the US basically said, no, I'm going to compete for the Chinese Olympic team because I'm like ethnically Chinese. People said like, you traitor, like how dare you? But also like people kind of realized that this only goes one way. This goes away from America, but it wouldn't really go towards America necessarily. And the thing is, like, if you took a country like Sweden or a country like Germany, and you divided up, like you destroyed, you used some like Martian tractor beam or whatever, and you just like surgically removed like the entirety of the political institutions. What you would see in Sweden or Germany is basically like some sort of centripetal force would bring together like a governmental form with like territories that were almost identical to what you have today. Like it would naturally reform itself. And if you think about like the term like the German nation, this term was used in like the 14th or 13th centuries, way like almost a millennia before you had an actual like German nation state. You had people like the German nation basically just meant people who are Germans. And eventually you have all of these sort of pressures to basically say, well, the German nation should also be a state, like the borders of the nation and the state should be identical. And so again, because you still have that thing where people make the equivalence between a nation and a state's borders, you would have the Swedish nation and the Swedish state basically like forming each other here. What is the American nation? Like, does anyone really believe that if you removed like the entire sort of you removed the Constitution, you removed all federal bureaucracies, and you removed Washington, D.C., and you return to a quote-unquote state of nature, who really believes that Minnesota would go, like, we aren't complete until we're in a political union with Texas? And people in Puerto Rico would go, unless we are part of the same political unit as Washington State and Idaho, like, something is missing.
But also, the strange thing though is that while there's not much in the way of glue to hold it all together, there's also not enough difference. Like we were speaking before in a previous episode about the end of the Soviet Union, right? Because all of the states that made up the Union were very distinct. They tried to dilute that somewhat through Russification, but that was, they were still essentially ethnic nations. Whereas America is kind of, there's not really ethnic states in the Union as such. You can kind of make some case, Louisiana sort of has French elements and blah blah blah, but you know what I mean. There isn't an ethnic. There are not ethnic states that would just logically form into independent states. It would all just be a bunch of vaguely similar kind of independent states. So there isn't logic to that either, kind of with the exceptions of like Puerto Rico, Hawaii, places like that.
Yeah, so what I'm saying here is just that, like, yeah, there's no like strong secessionism, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, you have some proto variants of that, like with the Greater Idaho movement, for example. Like that is some kind of like national aspiration almost. But my point on contention here is just that this thing isn't going to be sabotaged from the inside so much as it's just going to collapse under its own contradictions. And once it collapses, then reforming it will be impossible. Because again,
because it was formed by the Civil War, really.
Yeah. And there's no strong centrifugal forces pulling it together, but there's no forces keeping it or pulling it apart, but there's no forces pulling it together either. So once like the bonds are broken, like nobody will care enough to reform them, because like there are real similarities between people in Texas and people in Minnesota, but by and large, these people don't like each other very much anymore. And but
Well, I was just going to say that's a good segue to talk a little bit briefly about your article, The Rise and Fall of Nuremberg Christianity, about kind of this shared ideology that has sustained the Western world post-World War II, has really just kind of fallen apart, particularly since the Gaza genocide.
Yeah. I mean, I can't really give sort of a Cliff Notes version of it here because it's somewhat long, but I think my main contention is just that, like, and you see this if you talk to your parents, like these people were born into a religion that essentially had very specific, like, ideas about like the direction of the world, the role of the Jews as like these sacrificial victims that basically through their sacrifice, through the Holocaust, made our current sort of humanist, like rule of law, international law order possible. And who made transcending like racism and imperialism and all that ethnic muck of history, like the human condition, possible. Like, we before the Holocaust, you couldn't really say never again because like war, genocide, and so on, like that was just how the world worked. But after the Holocaust, just like after the sacrifice of Christ, you had this ability to say, like, we live in a new era with new rules and a new pathway to salvation. And my contention is just that, like, once this falls apart, you can't really recreate it anymore. And, like, Zoomers today aren't being taught this stuff. And even if they were, they aren't going to believe it. Like, today you have these really ridiculous, like, infographics on Newsmax, which, like, Judaism is the foundation of the free world. And it's like just a pyramid, and the base is like Judaism, and then over that it's like Christ, and then level after that, it's Christianity, and then the top level is the good old US of A. So like without Judaism, you can't get to the hamburgers, like, because like with Judaism is a necessary preconception for like NASCAR and hamburgers, and it's like, yeah, this works on boomers. Watch Newsmax. Like, you show that infographic to a Zoomer and he just says, why should I care about any of this stuff? Like, okay, it's the base of a pyramid, all right, but it's not the base of a pyramid I give a flying fuck about.
I thought of this when I was watching Marco Rubio speaking to, I think it was the Munich Security Conference, right? And he gave that whole kind of like soft white nationalist kind of talk. But it was the opposite to the post-45 ideology. He was actually saying to a European audience that you should not feel ashamed for anything in history, anything that has happened in history. And we are asking you as part of our whatever geopolitical vision to just forget all of that now. And there were just confused / annoyed looking, European representatives there just listening to this most of the time. And, so, I mean, it's all over the place, right? But I would say, what is your what are they trying to pivot to? Like, do you think there is a coherent thing when they were drafting this speech in Washington? What are they trying to pivot from the post-45 ideology to?
I mean, this is kind of what you get in a religious system that's in serious crisis, like a crisis of moral authority. Like you get various kinds of cults and iconoclasms, which I think this is a subset of. Where, I mean, the basic sort of logic here is things are currently falling apart. Like America is falling apart. And America used to believe in like all of these things that Marco Rubio is announcing. So like the rules-based order, for example. America was a big proponent of the rules-based order. America is now falling apart. Ergo, and this is the leap of logic here, ergo, the principal agent responsible for American decline is the rules-based order. Ergo, and this is an even bigger leap of logic, if we denounce the rules-based order, we will get back to our previous strength. You see this with Greenland. Like the thing about Greenland here is that, like, yes, there are theoretically minerals on Greenland, just as there are theoretically a lot of minerals on Antarctica. Nobody is chomping at the bit to go and dig for copper or whatever on Antarctica because the juice is quite literally not worth the squeeze. Like even if the deposits are probably much better than copper deposits anywhere else on the planet right now, because we kind of shoot through all the good ones. It's fucking Antarctica, man. Like it's not a livable environment. Like it's it would be so expensive that it's much better to go for much lower grade deposits because people won't freeze to death. And you won't have to pay them insane amounts of money to live there. And it's the same with Greenland. Like it's not economically viable to exploit these resources. And when it comes to the military bases, the US has like 100 people left on Greenland. Like if there was some sort of cynical realpolitik, like we really need Greenland to control like the Arctic, which is bullshit, by the way. Like the only way you would use the Arctic Sea here is if you're going from some place to somewhere else. And that someplace that you would be going would be China. And that somewhere else would be Europe. These are like, this is like the utility of the sort of sailing a ship through the Arctic, is if you're going from Europe to China or from China to Europe. That's it. You know where you would have to go through if you started in China or in Europe and wanted to go to the other place? The Bering fucking Strait. You know who sits on part of the Bering Strait, which is incredibly narrow and incredibly shallow? The United States of America. So if America wanted to prevent a Chinese ship from going to Europe or a European ship from going to China, they would just have to park a missile battery on the Bering in Alaska, and that's it. You can't sail through. So the idea that they would need Greenland to park a missile battery, like that's ridiculous. Like,
so what was that about then?
Well, here's the thing, right? If this was realpolitik and it's like, we really need Greenland, you know what they would do? They would like search 10,000 soldiers. They would build up all their bases that they thought they were going to need. And then once they had, 10,000 little green men on Greenland, they would just tell the Danes, okay, you have 24 hours to evacuate. And then we shoot you. Like this island is ours now. Like we have 10,000 soldiers here. You have like 50,000 civilians. But they didn't because they can't afford to. Like they can probably barely manage to 100 people now because the military is falling apart and doesn't have enough people. It's just like when we were strong, we did a lot of territorial expansion. And right now we are weak and we are dying. Why? And we're not doing territorial expansion. Ergo, the reason we are weak and we are dying is because we're not actually stealing territory from other countries. So if we started stealing territory from other countries, we would become strong again. And it's literally the logic. But then again, I mean, when I was 14 years old, I used to wake up like 8 in the morning to watch like the Pokemon show on Saturdays. And I don't really do that anymore. But I'm pretty sure that if I were to wake up at 8 in the morning and watch Pokemon, I don't know, on Netflix or whatever, I would not become 40 years old again.
There's a pretty good illustration of what you're talking about, of blaming the post-war ideology for the collapse, in terms of they've gone from Department of Defense back to Department of War.
Yeah,
it was called the Department of War during World War II, and then after World War II, they changed it to the Department of Defense, and Gore Vidal and Chomsky and others pointed out the hypocrisy, and now they're just going back to Department of War. I mean, yeah, it is like politically correct liberals thinking that if you just change the names of things, then that will make them based again. You know, it's Kiev, not Kyiv or whatever.
Yeah, and again, it's so interesting because again, like Department of Defense, that was a sign of strength. Like that was America basically leaning fully into the role of imperial aggressor and saying, no, we're not doing war, we're defending ourselves. Like we might be invading you, but this is the Department of Defense. Like, what are you talking about? We're not a warmonger. And now they really wanted to take that away because again, like this is like, you know, you're stuck on top of a mountain and you're freezing to death. What happens then is it's quite interesting. Like the last effort of the human body to preserve itself for just a little bit longer, it will just constrict blood flow to to your arms and legs, and keep the blood in, like, you know, at the center of the body, in order to like save on waste heat, because, you know, heat radiates out of the extremities much easier. And so what that produces, like this last-stage crisis response of the body as it's dying of hypothermia, that actually produces a real sense of warmth. And so you find these corpses that have frozen to death, and they've like, their clothes are like lying in a pile next to them, because they get this like really, like, they're delirious and so on, but they get the sense that like, I'm burning up, like it's too warm all of a sudden, and they take their clothes off. Like this is an actual observable thing. And this is like Pete Hegseth doing push-ups, like
he's benching 325.
Yeah, like all of that. Like this is the American empire, deeply delirious, basically taking its own clothes off in order, because it's just gone so warm on top of Mount Everest. It's the same sort of self-destructive, like you can kind of understand it in a way, like it's a psychological response to things falling apart, but it's actually like very self-sabotaging in a way. Like it's just like there's a mismatch between perception and reality here that is like fundamentally, like completely opposite to what's actually going on.
I don't think I've ever talked to Malcolm without thinking, I need to figure out a plan to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, dude, you need to go back to the old country.
Back to the motherland.
Yeah.
I'm going to say I'm a Ukrainian refugee so I can get a free hotel.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like that's the thing. Like people say, oh, Europe, it's so shitty, like it's so, you know, it's on the decline and so on. Yeah, like everyone's on the decline. That's kind of the way of the world. Yeah, the Chinese are pursuing like the Western developmental model and doing a really good job of it. But the problem is that everyone else that pursued that same model eventually ended up in decline as well. But I mean, you know, we in Europe, at least we're not fucking Americans. Like that's...
But you know, I actually do think, Malcolm, that before we started recording, I was telling you guys that I was reading this very annoying article in Works in Progress, and it's a sort of abundance, that style of thing, right? And venture capital and deregulation will get us out of this type of thing. And it was all about, Europe is stagnating. Why is this? Why haven't they produced a Tesla? And I thought it was just really delusional, like, because it's sort of when I look at what's happening in Europe right now, I see it as like a very walk softly and carry a big stick kind of thing. They're actually consolidating almost every day. I see something in the news that shows centralization, unification, all of that happening. You know, even things like trying to consolidate some kind of a more unified military, moving the economy more and more in a unified direction, the intelligence, all that stuff. I mean, I think if there's one big push to kind of, um, create more of a centralized development state model, then that's really that's you're over the hurdle kind of, and the whole period since the world wars has kind of been leading up to that. So in many ways, Europe's actually just getting started. Europe did not, all of these other places like succeeded in unifying, and Europe's problem was always that it failed to do that. Well, it did in various ways, different coalitions, but this is really the first time where you're going to have one big unified block, and that's coming. So actually, I think that's totally delusional to think that Europe is stagnating and America is sort of doing great. I mean, that's what it seems to be implying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm less optimistic regarding Europe unifying, but I would just say that like people like they don't have Teslas. What are they doing? Like that just kind of completely misunderstands the place America is at. Like America, I remember coming on to this show and we were talking about like this government shutdown, and I said like once you have people like queuing for food pantries and so on, like there's a real risk that you have some sort of altercation between because people were starting to activate the National Guard because they were worried about that. And then just after that, you'd have these Democrat senators basically crossing the battle lines and ending the shutdown. But I mean, just a couple of months after that, we actually got that same scenario of like armed military-ish like troops in the street just executing like protesters with the Minnesota thing. And what that's kind of revealed is just that like once you have people being shot in the back with like 12 bullets or whatever, first of all, like nothing happens to the people doing the shooting. And nobody expects anything to happen. Like they just have carte blanche to execute people. But also like half the country just says, the only problem with this is that like more of my quote unquote fellow Americans aren't being executed. Like I want more videos like this. Like the actual bloodthirst unleashed after the deaths of Rachel Good, Michael Petit, that was something to behold. Like it's really like Americans talking down to Europeans. Like take any European country, and if you have a video of a guy being executed by masked agents, you will not have anyone who's not like certifiably like insane and locked up in a mental institution going, you know what? I think our country needs just more of these street executions because they're fucking liberals. Like, if something happened like that in Sweden or Germany or Denmark or, okay, maybe not Great Britain, like, let's not talk about that place, but any other country, except for old Blighty, people would be appalled. People would say, like, no, we can't have a country like this. But in America, it's like, it's so, like, poisoned by partisanship. Like, Americans really don't like each other, and they don't mind seeing like the other side get killed. And so I think that like if the roles were reversed and Biden was executing like vaccine deniers or something, just straight up, just like shooting them in the back of the head or whatever at like anti-vaccine protests, I don't think many liberals would mind that actually.
Gore Vidal wrote this book called Julian, which is about Julian the Apostate. And there's a funny bit in it where he's saying, one of the characters is saying, if I go to hell, I'll see the Germans there. And they love to fight as much as we hate to fight. We Romans hate to fight. So it's sort of the late period, right, where they're just being sent out to do these things, but they don't want to. Their heart's not in it, but they also have an interesting conversation about whether you should. These Romans are having this conversation about whether you should educate people or not. One of them is making the case for, and the other one against. And one of them is sort of saying, there has to be this. He's kind of suggesting in a way the Turchin argument, right? That basically when there's too many elites, this causes instability or would be elites. And he's saying if we educate too many people, they will be unhappy ultimately. They think they want this, but they will ultimately be unhappy because they will not be able to fulfill the upward mobility. And so that kind of, I was thinking of that when we were talking about China. You were talking about how China is sort of is basically going to end up with the same cycle as the West. It's almost like there is a certain cycle of development there where as you develop, all of these people want to believe that they're moving upward, right? And the society is failing if there are not masses of people engaging in upward mobility. And the American system, I think one of the things that has probably kept it quite stable for a long time is the mass immigration, actually, because if you're inputting people always into the bottom of the class hierarchy, but they're not even citizens, they can't really register any unhappiness with that, right? And so even like a fail son can kind of hang around somewhere feeling at least that he is middle class. But yeah, that I don't know what the answer to that actually is, but it is interesting that at least in Gore Vidal's fictional version of the ancient world, they were discussing this back then.
I completely agree with the point you're making here. And I think that's kind of like, if you want to distill, when I'm saying that like a war with Iran is going to basically end America as it exists today. Like, people need to understand, I'm not talking about Iran nuking New York or whatever, or like making gas cost $50 a gallon, or killing so many Americans that there aren't enough Americans to populate America. None of that's going to happen. Like, the war is going to be fairly like uninteresting in the sense of like, yeah, there will be explosions. Maybe a destroyer gets sunk, maybe it doesn't. Like, none of that actually matters that much in like tactical terms. But what is going to happen is that, like, as you pointed out, the great stability of the US these days comes from like all these imperial mechanisms. Like, you import all of these people in order to like keep the imperial machine going. But once the military suffers a defeat, once the Tartars can no longer even pretend to be able to defeat the Russians, the tribute that the Tartars extract comes to an end. And the imperial machine in America cannot work without tribute. Like, again, America has a gigantic national debt. That debt could disappear tomorrow through hyperinflation. You would just say, okay, well, from now on, it costs $46 trillion to buy like a pack of condoms or whatever. Like, that's a new exchange rate. And then you wouldn't really have
I wouldn't be
anymore.
affected at all.
Yeah, same. But like the thing is, even if you do that, okay, you destroy all savings that Americans have, which is, that's not ideal. And you destroy all the savings that companies have, which, that will cause a Great Depression, but whatever, like you've had Great Depressions before. But when you're running a $2 trillion annual deficit, the only way to finance that is to have people basically accept dollars as a means of payment. And once you do hyperinflation, people will stop accepting dollars as a means of payment, because if you accept $2 trillion today, and that's enough to build, like, I don't know, 10 aircraft carriers. If you wait a month, it's enough to buy, 1 month subscription on Netflix. Like, at that point, you can't actually hold dollars. You can't accept them, because that's just lighting your money on fire, literally. And so at that point, once the US can no longer claim credibility in military terms, it can't really claim credibility in monetary terms either. And once it can't claim credibility in monetary terms, it will have to close the deficit by basically destroying the lives of every American failed son, and every American middle-class family too, and every American upper middle-class family too. Like, okay, the Walton family won't be impacted that much, but pretty much everyone below the Walton family will. And at that point, is having a lot of immigrants suddenly a point of stability anymore? No, it's opposite. It turns into a gigantic weakness. You can't really say, be loyal to the state because we're all part of this ethnic nation, which you can say in Sweden or Russia or China or even Iran, like with some modifications, because these are kind of multi-ethnic states. But it's like they are multi-ethnic, but they're still like they have the ability to basically unify the various ethnicities. Like, and that's been going for hundreds of years. America is not multi-ethnic in that way. So America can't really call upon ethnic loyalty, number one. It can't call upon economic loyalty, number two, because that will all be gone. And it can't call upon, like, well, we're all part of this glorious Roman legion, because the legions will be falling apart. What can it call upon? Like, we all like to watch NASCAR. We all like the same halftime shows at Super Bowl. No, I mean, and there wouldn't be a controversy over the halftime show if that was the case, if people all agreed. They don't. There's nothing keeping the country together. And so this, like, you have to read, like, after the Roman Empire ended, there were no Romans anymore. Like, Roman at that point was a term describing people who lived in the city of Rome. That's not what Roman meant 200 years earlier or 600 years earlier. Roman wasn't like a toponym. Roman was the name first of an ethnicity and then of an imperial entity. So you were first a Roman because you were part of the Roman ethnicity, and then you were a Roman because you were part of this creedal, like, empire. And eventually, like, people stopped using the term Roman as anything else than a toponym. And, like, Roman culture basically stopped existing. And American culture, like the American ethnicity that forms the core of the American empire, that will likely cease to exist as well for the same reasons. Like, that is what empires, once they burn themselves out, do. Like, they burn out the original ethnicity used to form the empire. I mean, there will still be people living in North America, and they will, like, be the descendants of people who once saw themselves as Americans. But I mean, like, what does America mean, really? When I watch these clips of people, like, bragging about America or, like, summing up Americana, and they're like posting clips on TikTok and YouTube. 80% of it is just military, like, wow, here's a battleship, here's a cruise missile, here's a stealth bomber, here's another stealth bomber, and there's a fourth stealth bomber, here's a non-stealth bomber, here's a non-stealth fighter bomber aircraft. Like, here's a non-stealth fighter bomber aircraft with electronic surveillance capabilities. And it's like, you never see that in any other country. If someone from China were to make a clip of like small video clips illustrating what China was, it would be like noodles, an aircraft carrier, like a funny dance, like Confucius, the Great Wall, like a lot of stuff. But with America, it's like a national identity is so tied up with the empire, at like as like an imperial function almost. Like the military is like the long arm of the empire. What is the empire? We don't really know, but we know it has aircraft carriers. Take that away, and it's like, why exactly don't Americans have healthcare? Like, what is the response if you can't point to an aircraft carrier anymore? You can't say, well, it's because of a unique national characteristic, because like nobody even knows what that is anymore.
It's because we owe so much to Israel, because they're the base of the pyramid
Yes.
of Western civilization.
That will be the new unifying creed that will unify all of America, loyalty to Israel. Like, that's the one thing all Americans can agree on, at least.
$100 copays at urgent care to support Israel so they can have free health care. I want to thank you as always, Malcolm. Very distressing but enlightening. If you have any thoughts, you the listener, please do sound off in the comments. I hope we're not accused of being doomers. I think this is a very accurate assessment of where we're going. And just living in America, it all feels very surreal because it's like it hasn't really set in. It's like we're just on this crash course with Iran. There's not any debate about it, but it also just doesn't seem like there's any force here that's going to stop this.
Yeah, you know what the title is of that book about the end of the Soviet Union? Everything was forever until it was no more. And I mean, that kind of speaks to the American experience right now, doesn't it? Like, everything is forever. The American military is forever, like forever wars. It's helping Israel. Everyone knows it can't continue, but we're all on autopilot.
Yeah. No, I'm planning my like spring vacation. I'm like, as if we're not going to go into an apocalyptic war in a week and a half. But, Malcom Kyeyune, thank you as always. I'm sure we'll have you back soon. The article in American Affairs is The Rise and Fall of Nuremberg Christianity. We'll have that linked in the description if you want to read the whole thing. I very much recommend it. And if you like this, if you want to support myself and Angela Nagel and hear a bit more of us, you can become a premium subscriber at either patreon.com/Rocinante podcast, ROCINANTEPOD, or at angelanagel.substack.com. But until next time, we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.